All right, let's talk about a classic David versus Goliath story, but set in the world of high finance. How does a company that's practically unknown even start to compete in a market full of giants? Well, today we're diving into the story of PASHA Bank Turkey. It's an absolute masterclass in strategy, especially when the odds are stacked against you.
So let's set the scene. Our story really kicks off with a huge challenge. Imagine you're Holly Yildirim, PASHA Bank Turkey's head of marketing. You've basically been handed what feels like an impossible mission. Take this brand new, tiny little bank and somehow make it a success in one of the most cutthroat markets in the entire region.
And really, that's the core question here, isn't it? I mean, think about it. You've got less money, you've got fewer people, and nobody, literally nobody, knows your name. Where do you even start? How do you compete?
And this quote, this just nails the reality of their situation. We're not talking about some abstract problem on a whiteboard. No, this was a real day-to-day grinding struggle. They couldn't even get a meeting. Why? Because the person on the other end of the phone had absolutely no idea who they were.
So you can see the mountain they were up against was just incredibly steep. I mean, look at this list. They were late to the party. They were, without a doubt, the smallest player out there. They were staring down massive, established rivals in a market that was already packed to the gills. And, oh yeah, they were doing all of this with barely any money or people. It was like they were getting hit from every single angle.
Okay, so the big question is, why? Why on earth would you even try to jump into a market that's so tough? Well, it turns out this wasn't just a random shot in the dark. There was a really big, ambitious vision driving this whole thing, a strategy that spanned 3 whole countries.
See, this was never about just sticking a new bank branch in Turkey and calling it a day. The real play here was to build a kind of financial superhighway, a corridor that would link the economies of Azerbaijan, Turkey, and Georgia. They wanted to tap into that unique, growing relationship between them.
And their goal? To become the absolute go-to bank for any business working along what they called this modern Silk Road. So instead of trying to fight everyone everywhere, they decided to just dominate one very specific, very strategic economic route. Now that was the brilliant pivot.
So, what was their plan? Pretty simple, actually. They decided to just follow the money. They looked at their existing customers from Azerbaijan, big players like the energy company SOCAR, and followed them as they moved into Turkey. This gave them an instant customer base, letting them handle the trade flowing between these 3 friendly countries. And, as a bonus, it gave them a key to unlock Turkey's super advanced financial world.
Okay, now let's talk numbers, because it's one thing to say the market was crowded, but it's another thing to really see it. Just how big was this Turkish banking jungle they were wading into? Honestly, the scale is kind of mind-blowing.
Get this, $795 billion. That's how big the total market was. To say PASHA Bank was a small fish in a big pond doesn't even cut it. They were more like a microscopic plankton in an ocean filled with blue whales.
And check this out. Look at where they decided to play. Not in the big leagues with the commercial or state banks, which make up most of the market. Nope. They went for that tiny little 5% sliver reserved for investment banks. Think about that choice. They were intentionally a small player in an already small part of this absolutely gigantic market. And just to make things even more fun, on top of all that competition, Turkey's financial regulations are some of the toughest in the world. So before they could even get in the game, PASHA Bank had to prove they were good enough to meet these super high standards. It was a massive test for the whole company, right from the get-go. So, faced with what seemed like impossible odds, they did something really smart. They realized, hey, we can't win by playing the same game as the big guys. So, they decided to invent their own. Let's call it the niche marketing playbook.
And their CEO, Sankine Han, he put it perfectly. They made a conscious, strategic decision. We're not going to be a bank for everybody. Instead, their mission was to become the one and only essential bank for a very specific type of customer. Any business involved in trade between Azerbaijan, Georgia, and Turkey.
And their playbook was just so methodical. Step 1. Start small. Play it safe. Work with other banks and financial institutions to build up some capital. Step 2. Once they had a foundation, they went after the top 1,000 companies that fit their perfect customer profile. And how did they market to them? Not with big, flashy TV ads. No way. Their entire strategy was built on good old-fashioned, personal, one-on-one relationships. They'd offer custom-fit services like letters of credit, which is basically the bank promising, don't worry, they're good for the money, to make that cross-border trade feel way safer for their clients. And this right here, this became their secret weapon. They called it customer intimacy. They knew they couldn't compete on price. They definitely couldn't compete on size, so they decided they would win on service. Their goal was to know their clients and their specific cross-border problems better than any of the big impersonal banks ever could.
Okay, so after all that, what's the big lesson here? What can we take away from this story of a tiny bank that had a strategy big enough to take on giants?
It really all boils down to something pretty elegant. For every single massive challenge they faced, they didn't panic. They found a smart, super-focused solution. They took what should have been their biggest weakness, their tiny size, and they flipped it. They turned it into their greatest strength by becoming experts in one thing.
And look, these lessons apply to so much more than just banking, right? First off, being the biggest isn't always the best. Sometimes a super clear, narrow focus can absolutely crush a scattered, broad approach. And maybe most importantly, true strategy isn't just about what you decide to do. It's about what you have the courage to say no to.
Which leaves us with one last question to chew on. In a world where it feels like every industry, from tech to finance, is being taken over by a handful of giant companies, is there any room left for the underdog? Well, if the story of PASHA Bank tells us anything, it's that for those who are smart enough and brave enough to carve out their own perfect little niche, the answer is a definite, resounding yes.